Sometimes in football, players outgrow their current clubs. In over 20 years following Hull City, I have had to witness that happen with Jarrod Bowen, Keane Lewis Potter, Kamil Grosicki, Sam Clucas, Harry Maguire, Andy Robertson, Robert Snodgrass, Jake Livermore, Abel Hernandez, Mohamed Diarmé, James Chester, Robbie Brady, Shane Long, Stephen Hunt, Michael Turner. Sorry about that. I just had to go and sob for 30 minutes in the corner of my bedroom imagining what might have been, but I'm afraid that is the reality of football, and particularly of modern football, which is more static and hierarchical than it has ever previously been. In the year of our Lord 2023, there is a very distinct football food chain, which has lower league teams with smaller budgets at the bottom, and top flight teams with bigger budgets at the top. In today's video, I wanted to take a look at a number of interesting examples, or I think at least, of players who I think probably deserve to take a step up that ladder in the summer of 2023. I won't be including the likes of James Ward-Prowse, James Maddison or Declan Rice, or even Jude Bellingham and Jonathan David, just because they are too obvious and therefore a little bit boring, and I think everybody already expects them to be on the move in just a couple of months' time. Right, without further ado then, here are my not boring 7 footballers who deserve summer transfers in the eyes of this arrogant YouTube nobody. 7th, Samuel Chukwueze. Possibly the most high-profile player in this 7, I am certainly not the only person who is of the opinion that Samuel Chukwueze has made a very good case that he should be signed by a super club once the current campaign draws to an end. Born and raised in Nigeria, like Nwankwo Kanu, John Obi Mikel and JJ Okocha, Chukwueze is of Igbo descent, so perhaps it is a little surprise that he cites Okocha as being his idol growing up. That is despite the fact that Chukwueze had only just turned 7 when Okocha retired, at Hull City it should be said, so if he wants to follow in the footsteps of his idol quite literally, I'd be all for it. That would necessitate a move to Bolton Wanderers at some stage though, and given that Chukwueze is, I would argue, the most impressive offensive player in La Liga outside of the big 3 at the age of only 23, that seems fairly unlikely. An absolute live wire, Chukwueze is predictable in the sense that he's a left-footed right winger who will invariably, at some stage, look to cut inside, but he is extremely unpredictable from that point on. Full of flair, energy and invention, he has scored 13 goals and made 11 assists in 41 appearances for Villarreal so far this season, and a lot of people seem to catch on to the fact that he is something quite special following his recent stunning brace in a 3-2 win away at Real Madrid. That is the kind of thing that he is capable of, and following 6 years at Villarreal, and 5 in the first team, I don't think that anyone could begrudge him a move. Reportedly valued at a hefty but understandable €80 million by Villarreal, who beat Arsenal, Porto and Red Bull Salzburg to his signature back in 2017, which also happens to be his release clause, Liverpool, Aston Villa and Real Madrid are said to lead the chase for the Nigerian, the latter presumably just so that he can't torture Nacho Fernandez when he plays against them again. 6th, Joao Pedro. From La Liga to the Championship, it speaks volumes about the ludicrous finances involved in the English game that a player like Joao Pedro should be playing second-tier football at all. Signed by Watford for £9 million in 2018, in a deal that couldn't be completed until January 2020, once he had turned 18 years old, Liverpool reportedly tried but failed to hijack the deal after Pedro scored a hat-trick against Atletico Nacional in the Copa Sudamericana. Watford hoped that Pedro would emulate the success of Richarlison, who they also signed from Fluminense in 2017, but though Richarlison joined Everton for between £35 to £50 million and has since been signed by Tottenham for £60 million, I would contest that between him and Pedro, in terms of technical ability, it is the Championship man who comes out on top. Tall, technically gifted, and deceptively hard-working, Pedro has played in pretty much every attacking role at Watford so far this season, but I think he is undoubtedly at his best in a withdrawn role, playing as a sort of second striker. There was no lack of interest in Pedro last summer after Watford were relegated, despite him only having scored 3 goals in the Premier League, but Watford's plan was to keep hold of him for another 2 seasons, one in the Championship and one in the Premier League, with the Brazilian contracted to the club until 2028, during which time it was hoped that his market value would increase. Pedro's market value has surely increased. He has made 16 goal contributions and looks to be the most impressive player in the Championship when he's at his best, but Watford have underwhelmed in the division, which means their chances of keeping hold of either Pedro or Ismaila Sarr are incredibly slim. Newcastle and West Ham United lead the chase for Pedro's signature, with Watford hoping to get a fee of around £30 million. Fun fact, Pedro's father, Chicao, was also a professional footballer, whose career ended when Pedro was just 1 year old, after he was sentenced to 16 years in prison for accessory to murder. Come to think of it, it wasn't very fun at all, was it? 5th, Enzo Le Fee. Probably the least well-known player in this 7. I know most people don't watch much Liga and football, but I'll often stick on a game in a desperate attempt to justify BT Sport's £25 a month subscription fee. There are few players over the last couple of seasons who I have been more impressed by than Lorient's Enzo Le Fee, who only recently turned 23, but is already, I would argue, one of the best midfielders in France. Capable of playing anywhere through the spine of a midfield, and even out wide when called upon, but at his best when relieved of most of his defensive duties, Le Fee has a bit of everything. He's clever in terms of his vision and ability to find space, he's a good athlete who plays virtually every minute of every game, and he is incredibly gifted on the ball, in the pass, and when delivering a ball into the box. Absolutely sensational in tight spaces and in transition, Le Fee is great at playing through the lines, and his subtle feints and drop of the shoulder, even from central midfield, remind me a little of Eden Hazard during his time at Lille. Born in Lorient, Le Fee has only ever played for his boyhood club, with whom he won promotion from Liga in 2020, and he has amassed over 130 appearances at the age of only 23. As good as he already is, I still think that he is capable of stepping up a gear in a stronger team, and even of breaking into what is a fantastic France midfield. Not only do I think that Le Fee deserves a move in the summer of 2023, because, what does that matter? It would seem as though he agrees. Le Fee recently announced that he will leave the club at the end of this season, having been linked with a handful of Premier League clubs, claiming that his mind was made up after Lorient, bizarrely, didn't even offer him a contract extension. That means that he has just 1 year left to run on his current deal, and someone is most likely going to land themselves an absolute bargain. 4th, Andre. Speaking of outstanding young midfielders, who ought to have a whole host of clubs queuing up to sign them, the name Andre Trindade de Costa Neto, or just Andre as he's actually known, might not mean that much to a European audience just yet, but ask anyone who follows Brazilian football what they think of him, and you will be met with a string of superlatives. Aged 21, there are already calls for Andre to be called up to the Brazil squad off the back of a superb 2022 season with Fluminense, in which the youngster played 60 games. We have seen a raft of very impressive ball-winning Brazilian midfielders in recent years, whether that be Fabinho, Fernandinho or Casemiro, and Andre looks to be the latest in that long line. A brilliant shield in front of a back four who can operate either as a midfield anchor or as a destructive force a little bit further up the field. Andre is better on the ball than any of those three that I just mentioned. He loves taking risks and attempting to wriggle free of a couple of challenges, which in turn opens up the midfield for Fluminense and allows them to create rapid overloads. Given his age, his performances have not gone unnoticed. Fulham and Nottingham Forest both bid for Andre in January, as was reported at the time and has since been confirmed by the man himself, who says that he promised Fluminense manager Fernando Diniz that he would stick around for another season, and he was reluctant to move whilst his wife was giving birth. He may also have been well aware that another 6 months playing like he did last season was only going to increase the calibre of teams interested in him, and so far this season, that is exactly what he's done. If Manchester City sell Calvin Phillips, I think Andre would be a fantastic addition as an understudy to Rodri, though it would also be quite nice to actually see him play. Third, Jose Gaya. The oldest player in this seven, it might seem as though Jose Gaya has been around for a very long time now, but he is still actually only 27. Arguably at the peak of his powers right now, quite how he has stuck around at Valencia, whilst Peter Lim has sold off every other valuable asset that the club has had over the last few years, I'm not quite sure. As a result of those repeated fire sales and a chronic lack of reinvestment, Valencia now occupy one of the 3 relegation spots in La Liga, and it would be quite frankly criminal if Gaya were playing Segunda Division football next season. I can't see that happening, as loyal as he is, and even if Valencia do survive the drop, there is no way that Gaya should be representing a club that isn't competing in Europe. Born in Alicante, Gaya joined Valencia as an 11-year-old, and he has been at the club ever since. Originally a striker, Gaya once scored over 60 goals in a single season for Valencia's youth team before being converted to left-back, and he has scored only 9 goals in over 300 games for the club's first team. Nonetheless, he is still an excellent attacking threat by virtue of his speed, movement, and deliveries into the box. I don't think there is a better left-back than him in La Liga, and there aren't many better anywhere in the world. Gaya has long been sought after by Barcelona, but has remained loyal to Valencia, where he is club captain, signing a contract extension last summer as he entered into the final year of his deal. The fine form of Alejandro Balde in his breakout campaign at the Camp Nou may have convinced Barca that they don't need to splurge out on a left-back anymore, but there are plenty of clubs that still do. Manchester City perhaps, or even Newcastle. Second, Pedro. There are 3 Brazilians in this 7, and that is because there are lots of very good Brazilian footballers, who knew, and the very best ones tend not to stick around in Brazil for long. Pedro, full name Pedro Guilherme Abreu dos Santos, is one such example of that, signed by Fiorentina back in 2019 for a fee of €11 million as a 22-year-old, having scored 15 goals in his last 29 games for Fluminense in the Campeonato Brasileiro Serie A. It's also worth noting that all 3 of our Brazilian inclusions began their careers at Fluminense, which is a testament to the club's youth department. A year before joining Fiorentina, Pedro ruptured his ACL, an injury which reportedly scuppered a move to Real Madrid. Unfortunately, things didn't quite work out for the Brazilian in Florence. In 4 months with Fiorentina, he played just 59 minutes of football before being allowed to join Flamengo on loan. In December 2020, Flamengo made that loan move a permanent one for a fee of €15 million after he scored 23 goals in 54 games on loan at the Maracanã. Since then, Pedro has gone from strength to strength, scoring 29 goals in 59 games last season and a remarkable 17 goals in 18 games so far this term. There is a bit of a habit of South Americans only getting one shot at making it in Europe, and that being that. You need only take one look at Pedro's teammate Gabriel Barbosa, the Campeonato Brasileiro star man in 2018, 2019 and 2020, but overlooked by European clubs by virtue of a failed 9-game stint at Inter Milan. Perhaps Barbosa and Pedro are content starring in their native Brazil and scoring hatfuls of goals. But supposing that he did want a second shot, I'd love to see Pedro back in Europe. A leggy and unorthodox centre-forward, Pedro often has a really unusual technique both on the ball and in the shot, but it's difficult to argue with the results. He's fun to watch, and he is one of the most informed players on the planet right now, hence his inclusion in this 7. First, Pedro Goncalves. From one Pedro to another, though this one is better known as Poch in Portugal, Pedro Goncalves has gone from not getting a look in at Wolves to being possibly the best player outside of Europe's top 5 leagues in barely the blink of an eye. Signed by Wolves as an academy player from Valencia, Goncalves' only appearance for Wolves came as a substitute in a 2-0 win away at Sheffield Wednesday in the EFL Cup. Having failed to get a look in at Molineux, Goncalves was allowed to join Famalicão in the summer of 2019 for a fee of €1.3 million, in what now appears to have been a monumentally stupid decision. Following a single outstanding season with Famalicão, in which Goncalves played 33 games in the top flight of Portuguese football, despite it being his first season of first-team football, he was signed by one of Portugal's big three, specifically Sporting Club de Portugal, for a fee of €6.5 million. That too now looks to have been a bargain, to put it mildly, and since signing for Sporting, Goncalves has made 88 goal contributions in just 122 games, including 31 in 44 so far this term. That's a record that most centre-forwards can only dream of, but Goncalves' time has been split roughly 50-50 between the left and right flanks, and his own favourite position is actually in attacking midfield. Unlike the Pedro who preceded him, who has a rather unorthodox style, Goncalves is as elegant and easy on the eye as they come, with fantastic technique on the ball and real finesse when striking on goal. Still aged only 24, I doubt that there is a club in all of world football that wouldn't want him, but the real question is at what cost? A rumoured fee of €40 million seems far too cheap, with his €80 million release clause feeling somewhat more appropriate. Aston Villa are the club who have been most heavily linked with Goncalves at this stage, and what a coup that would be, but if he can maintain his current form between now and the end of the season, it's hard to see why a bona fide super club wouldn't come calling. That is it for today's 7. There are more players than I care to mention who could have featured, but I will give a quick shout out just to World Cup finalist Randall Kolo Muane, former Arsenal centre-back Konstantinos Mavropanos, Spezia star Mbala Nzola, and Rennes's main man Martin Terrier, who all came close to making an inclusion. Thank you all very much as ever for watching. I hope that you enjoyed it. Hit the like button if that was the case, let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, and make sure, of course, it goes without saying, that you are subscribed both to this channel and my backup channel, both of which should be on your screens now. You can also find me on social media, on either Twitter or Instagram, via the username @HITC Sevens on both, should you wish to do so.